Right, welcome everyone. We might just wait another 30, 40 seconds or so, give people a chance to get into the room before we get started here today. Really excited to be joining CTLT Winter Institute today to talk a little bit about research infographics and how we're using them in the classroom. My name is Nick. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Community Engagement Librarian at the UBC Learning Exchange. I'm here presenting with a number of other folks who are involved in this work today, and they'll have a chance to introduce themselves when it comes time for their chance to speak. So in the session today, we're going to be providing some context for the creation of the Public Humanities Hub Infographic Toolkit, particularly giving some insight into the Making Research Accessible Art Studies 100 collaboration that produced a lot of the findings that were used in the toolkit, as well as the Public Humanities Hub perspective. We're going to do a walkthrough of the toolkit so you can see the different ways that you might be able to use it in your own work or practice. And we're really hoping that this session will demonstrate how research infographics can be used as a tool to engage with different users and help research reach a wider audience. A couple of small housekeeping things before we get started. As you'll see, the workshop is being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, you are welcome to turn off your camera. We're also going to pause recording during the participatory sections. We also haven't made a final decision about whether or not it will be published on the CTLT channel, but we'll be considering that after the session. Closed captioning is available if you go to the little 3 dots on the bottom of your Zoom call and click on those. You should be able to pull that up in that menu there. Additionally, we'll be sharing links to the resources that we mentioned throughout the session. They'll also be available in a Padlet that we'll be sharing a little bit later. All right, so we're going to move on to the next slide. And I'd like to start the session with a territory acknowledgement that was created in collaboration with Musqueam Elder Doris Fox for use with the Downtown Eastside Research Access Portal. So it says that we acknowledge that the Making Research Accessible initiative's work happens on the unceded, traditional, and continually occupied territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This portal is part of our ongoing commitment to changing the negative impacts of extractive ways of doing research and encouraging a more engaged and collaborative culture of knowledge exchange. And to take that a little bit further related to this particular project, we'd really like to invite reflection on the ways in which Indigenous cultures, technologies, and traditions continue to embody diverse approaches to knowledge exchange. Our project involves the use of multimodal means of sharing research information through infographics to make that information more accessible and transmissible to non-academic audiences. But this is far from ubiquitous in Western scholarly communications, in large part due to the insistence by colonial states on the exclusive legitimacy or positional superiority of text to serve that purpose. Yet visually encoding complex information is not new in Indigenous contexts, and to deny this history and contemporary practice contributes to Indigenous erasure. So to that end, we wanted to share one example from the UBC Vancouver campus on stolen Musqueam territory, where we can find several house posts described as monuments that can convey critical information about things like inherited rights and histories. The image that you're looking at right now is of the house post Siashke Kaikin, or double-headed serpent post, which was created by Brent Sparrow Jr. And this house post depicts the fascinating story behind Musqueam's traditional name. And you can find more about that story as well as the other Musqueam house posts on campus by following the link that we're going to share in the chat here. And to kind of bring this back to our project and the reflection we're inviting you folks to consider, many Indigenous cultures not only recognize the value of oral, visual, and other non-textual modes of knowledge exchange, but have been and continue to be leaders and innovators in its practice. They light the way as we seek more promising and reciprocal pathways for university community knowledge exchange. So once again, we invite you to seek out and learn from other examples of multimedia Indigenous knowledge exchange that challenge the narrative of colonial erasure. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Shannon to talk a little bit about the Padlet.
Great, thank you, Nick. Thanks for getting us started. Like Nick said, my name is Shannon, and I am the Student Success Librarian at University Canada West. Previous to that, I did work as a student librarian with the Downtown Eastside Research Access Portal. So that is how I got involved in the project, and the toolkit and the case study we'll be talking about later today. First, I'm going to just introduce you to the Padlet that we've created for this session and just do a really brief kind of screen share walkthrough to show you what the Padlet has and how you can use it. We will also add the link to the Padlet in the chat as well. So as you can see here, we have a few different sections on this Padlet. The first section has resources and links. So under this section, we have posted all of the different resources and kind of tools that we mentioned throughout our talk. So you could come here, click through these links to go visit those resources. Feel free to add to this section as well. If there is anything that you think would be valuable to share with the group, you can click the little plus button at the bottom and you can add links, images, text, etc. We also have a questions section as well. So throughout the session, if there's any questions that come up, please feel free to once again click this little plus button and you can type in a question. Feel free to add your name or leave it or post it anonymously. And we will be getting back to these questions at the end of our session. But we wanted to have a place where you can add questions as we go. If anything comes to mind, you can do it here. This last section, we have kind of a brief, or sorry, a little gallery of the different infographics that were created from the students in Ask to 100, which we'll talk about in just a bit. So I'm not going to share these at right in this moment, but at the end of the session, I will come back to the student-created infographics, and we'll do a little screen sharing, kind of show and tell to show you these infographics, and you can see what students have created for the Research Access portal. So I'm just going to head back to the slides now. And I'm going to pass it over to Evan to get us started with this activity.
Thanks, Shannon. Hi, everybody. My name's Evan Morrow. I teach in the coordinator program. It's a first-year gateway program in the Faculty of Arts. I teach there with Kirby Mania, my colleague, who will also be presenting today, and we both teach a course called Art Studies 100. It's kind of an intro to academic writing and research, and it's the place where the case study that we're going to go through today happened. I want to say that, a little bit later we'll kind of go into specifics of the case study in a fair bit of depth. And as Shannon mentioned, we'll go through tools and resources that have been developed through the project and through this really amazing partnership with the Making Research Accessible initiative. But I wanted to sort of back up, give a bit of rationale, and talk about one reason that we started teaching with infographics is that, we were presumably, like some other people who are attending here, looking to shake up the usual sort of set of assignments that we give, particularly a summary assignment, a research summary assignment. And we found definitely that students like working with infographics, but they often tell us that this infographic making project surprises them with, it looks simple, but it's actually really hard to do. So to give you a sense of how hard it can be, I'm going to ask you to dive in with a little activity that we use as a kind of a pre-infographic stage that we offer students to get them to kind of start to think visually. So I'm going to invite you to try the activity if you wish. Participation here is definitely highly encouraged. You can do it with a pen or a pencil and paper if you have that at your desk. If you prefer, you can go back to that Padlet that Shannon just showed you, and there's a little column there for draw the argument. There are a set of drawing tools in Padlet. You could do it digitally there too if you want. So this activity is preparatory to making an infographic for our students. It's kind of a pre-infographic step. It helps us think about things like layout, design, visual spacing, and graphics. And it involves a two-step process. So first, we ask students to take a summary of a research article, and we ask them to visualize that argument. That's the first step. If you're taking part in this at home, we suggest that you follow the slide's first direction there, which is to summon your own piece of argumentative writing. It can be something that you've read or written recently and can remember easily. It could be an academic article, it could be an online essay, a think piece, maybe a tweet thread if you're still on Twitter. Click around maybe your open tabs on your browser and see if there's anything you can work with there. Once you've chosen, and I'm going to work you through on a fairly sped up timeline here, once you've chosen, we try some sketch noting. which is a practice that we derived from a couple of different sources. The visual artist Linda Barry's amazing graphic nonfiction book Syllabus, which is sort of a series of drawing strategies she uses in university classrooms. And then the book that's cited on the slide here called Drawn Together Through Visual Practice, which is a really great introduction too to this form of visual note-taking. So as you can see from the slide, sketchnoting combines aspects of drawing, doodling, and note-taking, and offers a new way to summarize the flow and the structure of an argument. You can start anytime that you wish. If you have chosen an argument that you can work with, definitely start drawing it and start sketching it. And I'll just sort of talk my way through it. But as you're getting started, you'll want to think about the sort of two diagrams on the slide. There are 5 common elements in a sketch note. So text, words written down, right? Lines, containers, images, and also layout. And that's basically like your toolbox. Those are the set of tools you can use to make a sort of a sketch note come alive. Use any or all of them. The book also offers 4 basic poster layout types that you might try, and that's those 4 boxes towards the bottom right. So radial, path, top to bottom, center out, and division. These are only suggestions, of course. Please feel free to experiment with other ways to visualize the argument. But as you're beginning to draw your argument, you'll find that you probably have to make some important decisions. Like, where does the main claim of the argument go? That sort of thesis statement or the main argument. Where does your supporting evidence go? What combination of text and image can you use? And then how can the layout on the page help you get across the structure of an argument? So I'll ask you to be sketching, and while you're sketching, I'll just talk through kind of the point of this exercise for our students. In sketching, our students have to make decisions about what to foreground, what to center, and then what to background or even exclude. These are visual renderings of a very important critical reading skill on which their summary writing is based, and around which we teach the first few months of ASTU 100. The activity also asks them to think about what to represent visually and what has to be written out in text, and what combination of text and image best gets the point across. And then they'll also be having to think a little bit about how their reader's eye will move across or along the page, which we find really helpful later on when they're making their infographics too. So with all of that said, I'm going to hurry us up here a little bit. I normally give the students a little bit more time, but I'm going to ask us to, in a moment, on 3, if you did a drawing on a piece of paper, to hold it up to your webcam. Again, I didn't give you enough time to do this, so if it's a little messy, that's fine. And drawing talent, of course, in my classes and definitely here doesn't matter. I'm mostly a stick figure person when I can draw at all. But I'll ask you please to hold up your work to your camera if you did it. Sorry, I'm realizing that my background fuzzing is not quite helping here, but we've got a couple of these drawings up here. I had a bit of a head start. I'll admit that I did this before the session, but I gave myself only about a minute. Let me just quickly conclude here by saying that if you want to continue doodling while we talk, you're highly encouraged to, and if you want to do that on the Padlet app, you certainly can. We'd love to see some drawings of arguments, but hopefully this gives you a sense of the challenges of trying to visualize a textual argument. With that, I think I'll pass it back. I think it's Nick's.
Great, thanks, Evan. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of context for this case study that we're going to be drawing from today. My work here at the Learning Exchange has a lot to do with the Making Research Accessible initiative, which is a partnership between the Learning Exchange, UBC Library, SFU Library, Vancouver Public Library, a number of other different units at UBC, to investigate and respond to community priority identified by downtown Eastside residents who are frustrated with the extractive research practices that take place in their community. And so one of the key deliverables of this work so far is the creation of the Downtown Eastside Research Access Portal, which is an online resource that includes over 1,700 items of academic research, community creative materials, as well as more accessible knowledge exchange products like the infographics that we have been working on with the ASTU 100 students. And that really kind of gets to one of the, I think, key lessons that we've learned from the Making Research Accessible initiative, which is that open access isn't enough. Being able to download and potentially, view an academic article isn't the same as it being accessible to people who don't have the time or the disciplinary expertise to sort through all the jargon and other components of a research article. A lot of people who are advocates or working in the community are looking for key takeaways and quick summaries that help give them a sense if there's more to be found that is relevant to their work that they're doing in the community, which is really towards making change. And research has an important role to play in that process, but it can't fulfill that role when folks in the community aren't able to access it. So this particular project is a collaboration with Kirby and Evan, two instructors in the Coordinated Arts program, working with students, working with researchers, working with community members to create so far 17 infographics that have been published as part of the Downtown Eastside Research Access Portal. So I'm going to hand it back over to Evan and Kirby to talk about the process for making the infographics.
Thank you, Nick. Sorry, let me just get sorted here. So me again and Kirby in a moment, we're going to describe the case study for using infographics in the classroom. Again, just to underline, it's in an introductory academic writing and research class called ASTU 100 or Art Studies 100. And as Nick said, it's about having students create publicly accessible infographic summaries of research articles relevant to the Downtown East Side. From our perspective, teaching this intro research and writing course, the infographic project gives us a pretty good way to do community engagement and to offer some reciprocal benefit to research partners or community partners rather in a kind of an over-researched and under-resourced neighborhood. So it provides us or provides some community benefit without burdening the community with a kind of a time and labor intensive collaboration. That's part of the reason that we like it. But students also benefit from it in a couple of ways. They contribute meaningfully to this knowledge exchange project. They learn the contours of community-based scholarship. They learn to center ethical research and community relationships in their understanding of how knowledge gets made. And on top of that, like we went into it thinking students aren't just going to benefit from this, they also bring really important skills to the project. In designing the project, we kind of hypothesized that as non-specialists in research disciplines who have some research writing skills, first-year students might actually be particularly well positioned to do this kind of knowledge translation so that their infographics might really hit a sweet spot. But with that, I'll pass it on to Kirby, who's going to describe the process in the table on the slide.
Thanks so much, Evan. So Evan has partially introduced me already, but my name is Kirby Mania. I currently teach in the School of Journalism, Writing and Media and taught ASTU 100 with Evan in the Coordinated Arts program for 4 years. So you'll see there on the slide, we have a summary of our project overview. And so I'm going to be walking us through that. So students work in small groups to produce infographics. And we start from a handful of articles written by researchers who've agreed to participate in the project at stage 1. And we then in stage 2 offer students an orientation to the UBC Learning Exchange and the Making Research Accessible Initiative project. In recent years, this orientation has been supplied through a video by Nick and Angela Toll. Though the plan is to return on site and to do it in person this year. We then match students to research articles based on students' interests. In stage 3, we then ask students to summarize the assigned scholarly article, drawing on summary and citation skills learned in our course. However, where our students' previous summaries were written for academic audiences, this time we asked that they use plain language principles to make the summary more accessible to more people. And our team has debated the term plain language at length, and we're happy to discuss our use of it further if anybody has questions later on. But key aspects of the plain language approach include short sentences in the active voice, avoiding technical or scholarly jargon, and identifying the intended audience and aligning one's writing with their reading needs. Excellent summaries are then sent on to the article's corresponding authors for approval and feedback. And so we believe that author participation at this stage is really crucial. And in fact, we seek author feedback twice, at the summary step and again later when the students have started devising their infographics. And it's quite rare for first year students to have an external set of eyes evaluating their work, let alone a field specialist, and let alone the corresponding author themselves, who can detect minor points of inflection and misunderstanding in the conveyance of the gist of their argument. So having said that, research participation can also result in some complications and negotiation around the summary, as in any editorial process. So authors occasionally want specific wordings maintained, and students are trying to grapple their best with working with plain language principles, but they also don't have direct acquaintance with the communities represented in their research. So there's a little bit of back and forth as we zero in on accessible research summary language. The final step for our students in stage 3 is to design the infographics. And we've included photos on the slide from one of our infographic instruction workshops that Shannon and Nick facilitated for our students. In these workshops, teams peer-reviewed and edited their infographics in advance of submitting them. And then upon submission, the excellent ones were passed on to the corresponding authors for consent and further revision before publication on the RAP, the Research Access Portal. At this point, authors might further revise the language and might have suggestions for visuals and visualization strategies that we take back to our students. And the result is an infographic we hope does credit to the author's work, while it also creates a space for student ingenuity and talent. And thereafter, stage 5 speaks to the processes involved in licensing the infographics, uploading them to the RAP, and then in stage 6, our team gets together, we debrief the DIA's activities, and we reflect on where our project planning could be improved for the year ahead. All right, back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Kirby. So just very briefly, I wanted to share some of the sort of preliminary results of this work, particularly as relevant to community members in the Downtown East Side. So as I mentioned before, we've had 17 infographics that were ultimately published on the Research Access Portal. And those infographics have been downloaded over 1,000 times by our users. Shannon also led a series of focus groups in the community that confirmed the value of these infographics, as well as sharpened our toolkit, which you're going to have a chance to see later. They've also been extremely popular at our outreach events in the community, like pop-up libraries. They really get people's attention and kind of draw them into the content of the research. And we're also using them to help facilitate a new Knowledge Cafe program at the Learning Exchange, which brings together folks in the community to have conversations about the research that's taking place in their backyard. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kirby to talk about what we've learned as a result of this collaboration.
Thanks, Nick. So in the 3 years we've offered this assignment to our students, we have learned the following things. First, we think that our hypothesis that was put forward by Evan a bit earlier in our presentation, that first-year students, whom we like to position and treat as apprentice researchers. So our hypothesis is that we think they're well-positioned to do knowledge translation, and we think this has been confirmed by their work in their infographics. We think our project offers some insight into the complex questions around what kinds of literacies are required to do knowledge translation effectively. As first-year students are just beginning to learn research conventions, they have a fresh memory of entering the post-secondary environment and encountering the opacity of research writing and discipline-specific jargon. So really in this way, they're ideally positioned to work as knowledge intermediaries, able to track a scholarly argument, but also able to recognize how discourse used in the academy can often be inaccessible to those outside of it. Then there are some aspects of digital facility that may come into play here too, as students really surprise us with their graphical talents and their intuition with digital content. In their teams, students who are sometimes rather quiet in academic conversations can find themselves leading a group's efforts as different stages of the assignment call forth different skills and abilities. Another key thing we've learned about this project and its benefits to student learning is that this assignment offers the motivation of a real publication opportunity to students whose names get to appear on a library search, which is a rare opportunity and thrill. And also, students are not just having their work evaluated by an instructor, but are working with the instructor and the article's corresponding author, getting authentic editing feedback from several sides and undergoing a real editorial process. They do this collaboratively and are motivated to work together on a task with intrinsic appeal as a research advocacy project that involves both knowledge translation as well as knowledge mobilization, which is very important for us in this project with low demand on an already over-researched community. All right, and I'm handing it over to Heidi and Sydney.
Thanks, Kirby. Hi, I'm Heidi Rennert. I am a graduate academic assistant at the Public Humanities Hub, and I had the opportunity to help produce the Infographics Toolkit in partnership and consultation with the expertise of our co-presenters today. So I'll just briefly introduce the Hub and what we do there and why we find these toolkits important. The Hub began as a 3-year pilot in 2019 to foster, support, and highlight collaborative research among humanities scholars at UBC. And part of our mandate is to support scholars who are applying either public scholarship or community-engaged methods in their research and in the classrooms. And we launched a toolkit series to introduce researchers to a particular public scholarship method and then to point them to existing resources on campus at UBC, because we find that there's a lot of people doing this work, but they just don't really know what's available to them on campus. Each of our toolkits focus on a specific theme or method and then includes actual examples from classrooms or existing projects. We have example syllabi, assignments, other kinds of things. And so, for instance, to date, we've created toolkits on using Wikipedia, writing op-eds, curating exhibits, on podcasting, and we all try to integrate in all of them some kind of teaching component. And if you check out our site, you can see the full list of toolkits. So building the Infographics toolkit has been our most collaborative process to date. Normally, we brainstorm toolkits by identifying and then inviting scholars to a panel, and then we build the toolkit from it. But in this instance, we were approached and asked to develop a toolkit based out of the existing projects that we've just heard about today. And we were really excited to respond to this request. And my colleague Sydney will discuss a little bit more of that collaborative context.
So my name is Sydney Lines. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also a graduate academic assistant at the Public Humanities Hub, and I co-manage our public scholarship series, which these toolkits are a part of. So the Infographics Toolkit actually started as a conversation in July 2021 between Hub Director Mary Chapman and Heather O'Brien, who's a professor in the iSchool. And Heather was leading a SSHRC partnership grant called STORY, or Supporting Transparent and Open Research Engagement and Exchange. And there's a link for more info on STORY in the Padlet. And so inspired by Kirby and Evan's Art Studies 100 class that we just heard about and their work in the downtown East Side, as well as a few other infographics projects at UBC, we felt like there was ample opportunity and a need to organize and coordinate a toolkit to help UBC scholars who were also considering using infographics in their work or in the classroom to locate resources. So through STORY, Heather O'Brien ended up hiring Shannon Murray as a graduate academic assistant, in part to help develop the toolkit with Nick at the UBC Learning Exchange and the Making Research Accessible initiative. The toolkit became a vehicle through which to capture and build upon the momentum and enthusiasm that was percolating in these various units on campus. So from our perspective at the Public Humanities Hub, the Infographics Toolkit offered both an opportunity to build an interdisciplinary resource with multiple on-campus collaborators and to offer another tool for communicating research, since infographics are just one of the many different genres that allow scholars to communicate their research and to bring knowledge exchange practices into their courses and into their classrooms. And I will hand it back to Heidi now.
Yeah, so earlier this spring, the Public Humanities Hub hosted a panel which included our presenters here and more about sort of the projects and how to get into doing infographics. And then from that panel, we took that information to build it into a toolkit. You'll get to actually see a recording of that panel in our toolkit as well. Shannon wrote most of the toolkit, and then Sydney and I turned it into its final form based on our templates, and we're now hosting it on our website. And we're very pleased and excited with how it came together, and we really do hope that it'll be useful for people who would like to use it in their classrooms. And with that, I'll pass it on to Shannon to give you all a walkthrough.
Great, thank you. So now we've heard from Sydney and Heidi about the creation of the toolkit and the various collaborators and units involved in its creation. But I'm going to talk about the toolkit itself and the content that is featured within it. So the toolkit is really multifaceted as it delves into the different ways infographics can be used as a tool in knowledge mobilization, but it also provides recommendations for the creation of infographics. These recommendations are focused on the design, the different visual elements, as well as language and text. I am going to share my screen and walk through the toolkit itself, just so you can get a better idea of these different elements and how you hopefully might be able to utilize it in your own practice. So let me open this up. Okay. So the toolkit starts out with a brief introduction, asking the question, why infographics? And this acts as kind of the basis for the following content that is contained within this toolkit. We wanted to make it clear from the very start that infographics really have multiple uses and that the toolkit hopes to connect these dots. So we used input and expertise from a number of scholars and experts to really ground the toolkit. As was mentioned just before, there was a panel that took place that was hosted by the Public Humanities Hub, and these scholars were featured on this panel. So in this panel, the scholars discussed infographic use and creation. So Evan and Kirby, who are here today, talked about infographics and community use, community engaged learning. And we had Lupin Battersby and Valerie Huska, who delved into research dissemination. And you can watch that entire panel through the toolkit linked on the Padlet as well. Next, we have our infographics as advocacy section. Here you can learn about the ways in which infographics can be a tool for change. And as we say here, it could be to inform policy or further social or political causes. Classroom examples are also integrated in this section of the toolkit, and there's kind of some tips on how you can join advocacy and infographics within a classroom setting. And as you can see here, I think one of the unique things with the toolkit is the integration of the quotes that came from that panel, which again just helps to ground the toolkit and connect back to that panel that we had earlier in the year. Scrolling back up, we have our infographics as pedagogy section. So you've already heard from Evan and Kirby about the Ask2 case study, but if you did want to learn more about using infographics as a pedagogical tool, you can visit this section here. You can find additional examples of infographics being used in a classroom. And you can also find information about how you might be able to integrate infographics into different assignments if you are an instructor and want to bring them into your own classroom. There is additional information about the case study here. Again, you can hear from Evan and Kirby. And notably at the very bottom, we have some further reading and resources that includes a list of different courses by UBC scholars that are actively integrating these infographics into their own assignments and courses. We have some guides and articles as well for you to reference. Next, we have our infographics as research section. And in this section, we dive into infographics as a genre that can support the dissemination of research in a really clear and accessible way, using attractive visuals and plain language. We make the case for accessible research dissemination. And here we really highlight the communication element of the research process itself and how sharing one's scholarship to a wider audience should not be overlooked, and just highlighting again that it's a really vital part of the research process itself. As we continue on through this section, there is some additional information about the efficacy of infographics in regards to cognition and comprehension and just why they work so well. And then we end with a little blurb about data visualization. And this toolkit was created with more of a qualitative research focus. So it was important to consider what data visualization means when interpreting and sharing the sort of qualitative research. And then lastly, here we have the infographic creation section. So this section ideally can be used as a guide when creating your own infographic. And it also includes recommendations for infographic creation that were developed through a literature review and the focus groups that Nick mentioned earlier on today. I'm going to briefly walk you through this section and each of the recommendations that is put forward in the toolkit. So there are first a few questions that you should ask yourself before creating an infographic. These questions include who is the intended audience, what narrative approach is most fitting, and also what information do you want to center within the infographic. So these questions can help you as you begin the creation process, and they can guide you throughout the remaining design and creation process. Next, we move into the design principles and design recommendations. So of course, unsurprisingly, the design of an infographic really plays a major role in its effectiveness. Through our focus groups, we found that badly designed infographics can deter readers and cause a lot of confusion. Therefore, you need to consider the layout you use, the color scheme, as well as the typeface. And the 3 design recommendations that we put forward in the toolkit are to use a simple, clear layout with defined sections. And while this might seem a bit obvious, the layout of an infographic can really play a major role in its success. Barlow et al. State that the structure of an infographic should be logical and clear, as this will reduce or minimize confusion and reduce misunderstandings. A tip that can help with this is to create a layout that will support a natural left-right, up-down reading structure. And we also suggest using headers to differentiate between sections, as this can make an infographic a lot easier to read and limit the amount of effort that the reader has to put in because everything is clearly labeled for them. We also suggest using a color palette that features 3 to 4 colors and to be consistent in its use. While playing with color, can be fun, exciting, it can be less than effective when attempting to disseminate this sort of research. By choosing a limited color palette and really sticking to it, you once again reduce distractions. Here we have a color checklist included in the toolkit, and it provides some additional elements to consider when choosing your color palette. And we suggest being aware of the color combinations you use as well for accessibility purposes. So I scroll down here. We also suggest using a sans serif font and to size text appropriately according to its function. So sans serif fonts can be easier to read in smaller sizes. And with infographics created to disseminate the sort of qualitative research that we based this toolkit on, they can feature more text naturally. So choosing a sans serif font may provide readers with some ease when reading through the infographic. Even further, it's helpful to size text according to its function. By using font size strategically, so example, the title, of course, being the largest, and then the header, and then the body text being the smallest, it will simplify the reading process and again, limit the amount of work that the reader has to put in to understand the layout and the order in which they should read the information presented to them. Next, we have some recommendations for visual elements. We differentiate between the 2 types of visual elements that one might use within an infographic, and we recommend to use visuals that are relevant and appropriately placed. As mentioned earlier, these recommendations were created after these focus groups were held, and participants noted that visuals that were irrelevant to the text were really confusing and felt unnecessary. And the participants preferred the use of visuals that corresponded with the written information found near or beside it. Even further, the overuse of visual elements really crowds an infographic, so you need to incorporate white space and be conscious of the amount of visuals used and, again, how you use them. Lastly, we have 3 language and text recommendations included in the toolkit. First, we recommend limiting specialized language and jargon. To reach a wider audience beyond one's area of expertise, it's really vital that you consider the language that is being used. We suggest limiting specialized language and jargon when possible, or if it's not possible, providing definitions if no plain language alternative is really possible. Again, this is especially important to consider when thinking about this sort of qualitative research. as there's more reliance on the text to convey information rather than charts and graphs and data bits. Next, we suggest aiming for between 200 and 250 words in your infographic. Less tends to be more in some cases, so try and limit these words that you use. Focus group participants found that the graphics with less than 150 words really left them wanting more information and feeling like they didn't get the whole kind of story or the whole understanding the whole research article that this infographic was based on. But those infographics that had over 300 words were thought to be dense and kind of hard to navigate. Again, just a lot of text and too little white space. So there was kind of a middle ground that was found with this 200 and 250 words that seemed to be a sweet spot that allowed for the information to be conveyed, but not to be overwhelming or hard to navigate. Lastly, we also suggest integrating quotations if possible. Quotations are a really great alternative for this kind of qualitative research and qualitative research-based infographics. Again, you might not have charts or graphs to include, so a quote could be a focal point of the graphic and could work to draw readers into pursuing the rest of the infographic and maybe the research article itself if they choose to do so. So that is those are the recommendations that are put forward in this toolkit here. And of course, to learn more about each, you can come and walk through the toolkit on your own time. To wrap up this toolkit walkthrough, though, I'll just briefly show you the resources page we have here. We have suggestions for software that you could use to create your own infographic, or you could integrate it into the classroom and have your students use these different types of software. For Ask 100, Canva was kind of the go-to, and it seemed to work quite well for all of the groups. We also have some additional planning resources if you wanted to read more. Once again, if you wanted to plan a infographic assignment for your own class, or you wanted to evaluate infographics in a classroom. And then lastly, there are some additional talks and presentations that we've included with a focus on, infographics for knowledge mobilization and within the classroom. So I'm going to exit the toolkit. And head back to the slides here. Okay. So to end the session, we wanted to highlight some of the infographics that were created by the students throughout this continued MRAI Asked You collaboration. And over the past few years, Asked You students have worked as teams to create really effective infographics that now reside alongside the full research article in which they are based. So on the left side of the screen, you can see the wrap item record for one of these student-created infographics. There is a brief description about the project and the creation of the graphic, some descriptive metadata, and then a link to the original research article, which are at the very bottom, but related materials. If you were looking at this item record on the wrap, you could go click this and be brought to the full research article. On the right side of the screen, we have the infographic itself, which is hosted on Circle, which is UBC's open access institutional repository. We are going to add the link to the entire collection of student-created infographics in the chat, so you are free to browse them. And I'm just going to quickly walk through a couple examples now, just so I can show them on the screen and you can get an idea of what students actually created throughout this entire project and see what they have been working on. So just give me 1 second again to get back to the Padlet. Okay, so again, you can come and look at the Padlet on your own time, and it might be a little bit easier for you to look at the infographics on your own screen. But we chose a few infographics here that we thought were a nice representation of what students have done so far in this project. So here is one that was recently created in this past term, so from the recent batch of infographics. I'm just going to zoom out so maybe you can get a full idea of what they look like. When you look through these infographics, you might be able to see some different elements from the toolkit, those recommendations put forward. Like, for example, this infographic has some really clear sections. They have a quotation integrated to kind of act as that the focal point. And they did a good job of kind of limiting the visuals to, ensure that there's that white space included within their infographic. This next one here came, I believe, from the first round of infographics created. Again, really clear sections, the limited use of visuals that correspond with the text featured beside it, and that kind of consistently used and simple color palette as well. And then I'll show you one more here. This was a really unique one that we saw from this most recent group of students, which we were all, I think, really impressed by. Just the creativity, like Evan and Kirby said, some students really came in and were able to make the project their own. And I think this is one example of a really successful student-created infographic. But still, you can see some of those recommendations. Even though they've taken it in their own direction with these kind of visual elements, they are clear with their sections included. They integrate a quotation here and have everything really well laid out. So I'll just leave it with those ones for now. But again, I really recommend you, take some time if you have it to look through the full collection on the Research Access portal, as there are so many fantastic student-created infographics that we would love to share with you all. Just going to go back to the slides now. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the kind of content portion of the session, and we can move into questions now if there are any. And I will just stop sharing my screen as well so I can see everyone finally.
Okay, so at any point, if there's anybody who wants to raise their hand and ask, you can do that as well. Otherwise, we'll be using the Padlet. And there is one question here that is going to be for Kirby and Evan. It's about assessment. And it says, I hate to ask, but I have to. How do you grade the projects? The teamwork, the full write-up, the infographic alone?
Yeah, it's a great question. Kirby will probably answer this better than I will, but it goes through successive stages. Like I would just point back to what Kirby said about the different steps that students take. We grade them based on the summary that they write first. On the infographic itself too. And there, we're using the recommendations that Shannon's focus groups gave us to both teach how to do an infographic and also how we're evaluating the success of their infographics. And then, shoot, I don't know. I mean, like definitely we're evaluating group work. This is a group project, and so students' participation in the group work is a big part of it as well. Kirby, there's more to this? I'm sure that I'm forgetting half of it.
No, I think you did a good job covering it, Evan. I mean, we obviously break the project up into various steps. And so we first get the students to read and translate the assigned article as individuals. And then they get together in their groups and they collaborate with their individual summaries to produce a consolidated group version of it. We actually grade the individual summary for participation purposes. The group summary we look at in terms of our rubric is informed, as Evan said, by what's come through in our community focus groups, as well as principles that relate to the teaching of summaries in our academic writing courses. So we're ensuring that students are conveying the gist of the article, that there is adequate representation of its key findings, that the summaries themselves are clear. So we've got quite well-established rubrics that the students can follow and determine where they need to work on. And then we also grade the infographics themselves similarly with the principles guiding our rubrics in terms of what the community focus groups have pointed out are important elements of what they need from these targeted genres. And then we also, in both of our courses, have students reflect on their engagement with this advocacy project. And so they think carefully through what they themselves have been able to contribute, what they've learned from it, and what they've thought about the process of engaging in group work. So it's a process that we evaluate at each stage.
Yes, thanks. I totally forgot about the reflective piece. It's a major part of it. The other thing that I'll quickly say is that it has happened, like we do send some forward to the researchers to be vetted for publication. And it's not always the case that like the top mark getters are the ones that we send forward. That second part of it is a decision made by committee. Shannon and Nick are involved in it, and we all just sort of look at what we have and sort of decide which ones we think are best to send forward to the article authors. It's sort of, I guess, semi-autonomous from the grading procedure because sometimes my grading is, I guess, wrong, and so we send forward a different infographic than I thought was the best one, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, and I mean, Evan, we had a situation where this most recent year, as a result of our committee, we liked the visuals produced by one group and liked the content produced by another group. And we actually got the two groups to work together and produce a combined sort of augmented infographic, which I think spoke to each of their individual groups' strengths.
Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'll keep moving down the Padlet. There's actually somebody who, I guess maybe this would be for Nick, who's interested in seeing if there's a way to look at an overview of the results from the focus groups.
Yeah, so we've only done 2 focus groups as part of this initial work and are hoping to do more in the future to improve sort of the rigor of the results, but you can find those initial results in what's basically almost like a prototype for the Public Humanities Hub toolkit that Shannon created, focused specifically on this project. So you can follow the link there and take a look at those results. I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to share about that, Shannon.
Yeah, I'll just add that there are a few additional files there. So there's my main kind of research project, and this was created as a professional experience project I did when I was at the iSchool at UBC. So that contains the focus group information, like the methodology and the results. But there's also a creation guide included and a checklist that I created for Evan and Kirby's class. And then we were actually able to use the checklist in those workshops that Nick and I facilitated. And they were just a good way to kind of give students a guide to follow and work through a checklist. And I think it was useful for them. It seemed like they were able to engage with one another using this checklist and engage with the different infographics being created. So those are also included in that link that Nick just sent, along with, of course, that focus group information as well.
Yeah, and we can definitely add that link to the Padlet as well under resources.
It should actually, sorry, I'll just add, just under research project, which is very vague, but it is linked there as well. Yeah.
Okay. There's one final question here that is, again, for Evan and Kirby. It's about contacting authors. So have you had any authors you contacted hoping to use their articles for this project who were reluctant to participate? If so, what concerns have they articulated and how did you address them?
I actually want to pitch this one to Nick because he handles most of the
okay.
contact.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like generally people are pretty enthusiastic, or authors. Sometimes they're slow to respond. They're busy with teaching and research and all these other responsibilities they have. We may have had a couple of cases where we haven't received a response. In a couple of other cases, researchers have pointed us to, some other sort of accessible derivative based on that article that they had already kind of worked on or someone else had worked on. But what I think is really interesting about that is that that wasn't clear to us that existed or where we could find it. And so that was something else we could then add a link to in the research access portal. And I think highlights the need for having a collection like that actually brings all these things together. Because aside from the academic articles, when these sorts of materials are created, they're very frequently hard to find or not connected to the original research. So their impact might be a little bit limited if they're not shared in the places where people are going to be looking for them. So that's also been an interesting learning. But I think generally researchers are pretty enthusiastic. Worst case scenario, they refer us to a different author, I think, because they don't have the capacity to take it on. But usually they're pretty excited for the opportunity to work on this project and go forward. So I think capacity is probably the biggest hurdle for them.
Okay, well,
I
we
could
don't
just
have
really
any more.
quickly-
Oh, go ahead. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Sydney, to just quickly add one note to that. Nick, as mentioned, is the person who does the author reach out or outreach, and so knows this stuff. But we do, in the initial contact with them, try to outline that it's a little bit of work for them, right? Like that's maybe part of the reason that we get a few people saying no. And it's, like Nick said, fairly rare. Most people are really enthusiastic about the project and about getting basically like free knowledge translation of their articles done. But it does involve a bit of work, and we try to outline what that is. As Kirby mentioned, they're giving feedback to students at various stages, right? And we're fairly clear about how much work it is, but again, it's sort of a capacity issue for some folks, for sure.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. I do have a question for all of you, though, which is mostly about being able to look back now. Is there anything you would do differently in the beginning if you were doing this again in your classroom? Or did it all go swimmingly, just as you planned?
I could say that I would, if I were to do it all over again, two things. One, I would look at more infographics first, just because I thought I knew the genre, but probably didn't know it well enough. And I probably should have spent more time with the tools that we give students. Like we ask them to go to Canva or Pictochart, or some other sort of template-based infographic makers. And I didn't really have an idea of exactly how all of that, I had an idea of how it worked, but I didn't really get into the nuts and bolts of that. And shoot, I can't remember what the rest of it was. So if anybody else wants to jump in here on what you would do differently if you were starting over.
I mean, I think that this process is something that's iterative and collaborative, and we learn and implement new things each year. And one of the, I think the strengths of the most recent iteration is having Nick and Shannon support us, and especially in terms of the focus groups, generating the toolkit resource, the report. I think that was something that has really emboldened and supported our project. And I think that if we had only known now how these resources could be helpful, I think the project would have been stronger from its inception.
Okay, well, we have less than 2 minutes left, so I don't see any more questions, but I do have to give a plug for the survey. CTLT has a survey that they would like us to share, so please fill out the Qualtrics survey here. It is now in the chat. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm so glad that you could make it. It always feels great to talk with these folks again about the toolkit. It was incredible to make. So thank you all for joining us, and have a good weekend.
Thanks, everyone.